Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Today, we're continuing our ongoing coverage of the war between the Russian Federation, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and its Ukrainian proxy forces. Now, there has been some news in various Western media outlets discussing the issue in which allegedly up to 30 North Korean soldiers were killed or wounded in engagements with Ukrainian forces, specifically within the Kursk Oblast, the Kursk salient or the Kursk incursion pocket. Now, why are news outlets reporting this, which is essentially a very small engagement? If you have 30 personnel injured or KIA'd, that is essentially a company-sized element of the North Korean military that possibly became engaged with Ukrainian or Ukrainian mercenary units, Western units, operating inside of Russia. Now, there are other issues going on at the same time that the Western press, the Western media, is simply not reporting on. And that continues to be the success of the Donbas offensive. So under the guise that no news is good news and some news is even better news, and that some news is going to be that small engagement between allegedly North Korean troops and the Ukrainian military in Kursk, in the what I like to call the potato fields of doom, because that is essentially what is happening. They are fighting and defending potato and sunflower seeds fields in the Kursk Oblast, with just one small border town being taken by Ukrainian proxy forces. Now, if we look at what has happened and what has occurred over the last just few days, especially Kharkov, we know that the Russian flag, as we speak, is now flying over several major structures and buildings and terrain features in Kharkov. The town has been enveloped and is in the process of being cleared by Russian forces. Additionally, envelopment operations are occurring all across the Kharkov pocket. Again, let's kind of back up and see what exactly is happening in terms of the seizure of territory and the envelopment and the destruction of these NATO-backed Ukrainian units. And it's significant. So what you're seeing here, or rather what you're seeing in Kursk, pales in comparison to what you're seeing right here in the Kharkov pocket. Now let's advance it just a few days, and you the viewer can see exactly what is happening. And this is, again, a very dire predicament for Ukrainian forces. Now, in order to, again, some news is good news, and that some news is this engagement or this alleged engagement between Ukrainian forces and the North Korean military that occurred in Kursk. Again, that is essentially the best news that the Ukrainian military is able to provide at this moment. Again, not really covering what is happening in Kharkov and other locales as well, the envelopment operations that are taking place near Kupiansk. Again, major envelopment operation occurring there. Now let's look at an article that was published recently about this North Korean engagement with Ukrainian forces. At least, the title is "At least 30 North Korean soldiers killed, wounded in Russia's Kursk region, Ukraine." Ukraine said Monday that its troops killed or wounded at least 30 North Korean soldiers who had been deployed by Russia to its western Kursk region where Ukraine has seized territory. Thousands of troops from North Korea have come to reinforce Russian forces. Now look, I contend that these North Korean units are not there to reinforce the Russian military. Meaning, the Russian military does not require these North Korean units to operate in Kursk. On the contrary, I believe at this point, the Russians have intentionally set up these blocking formations where the Ukrainians cannot advance further, deeper into Kursk. They can't threaten any major transportation routes. They cannot threaten the city of Kursk, and they can't threaten the power plant on the western outskirts of Kursk, northwestern outskirts of Kursk as well either. But what you do have, and I've discussed this before, are several Ukrainian brigades that are being relentlessly degraded and shelled, requiring more and more Ukrainian personnel, which the Ukrainian military is having personnel challenges. And if they're not advancing, and if they're in a position where they're just simply being shelled day in and day out in this blue area that you're seeing, and they're losing personnel, and we know that the Russians have accumulated enough force in this area, and we'll have a quick review. 83rd Separate Guards Air Assault Brigade, the 51st Guards Airborne Regiment from the 106th Airborne Division, the 137th Guards Airborne Regiment from the 106th, so essentially the entire 106th Guards Airborne Division deployed, the 56th Air Assault Regiment, Major Elements 234th Airborne Assault Regiment from the 76th Division, Airborne, 155th Separate Brigade of Marines, 104th Airborne Assault Regiment of the 76th Division, Airborne, 810th Naval Infantry Brigade, 177th Separate Regiment of Marines, Reserve Formations, 11th Separate Assault Brigade, 237th Airborne Assault Regiment from the 76th, so the entirety of the 76th Airborne Division deployed. The 64th Separate Motorized Rifle Brigade, the 38th Separate Motorized Rifle Brigade, the 7th Airborne Assault Division, the 71st Guards Motorized Rifle Regiment, and major elements of the 42nd Motorized Rifle Division. So that force construct alone is going to disallow further Ukrainian advancement. On top of that, again, the Ukrainians are not utilizing any air power. The Russians have the ability to call on the full weight of their air force to operate against these Ukrainian forces. So again, when we talk about the Ukrainians reporting casualties of Russian forces, this misreported concept that the Russians are losing more personnel in this Kursk Oblast, in this Kursk incursion, than the Ukrainians is nonsensical. Again, the reason being, the Russians have superiority in terms of artillery, multiple launch rocket systems, heavy artillery, long-range fires. We must acknowledge that the Russians have that advantage. Secondly, the use of air power, helicopter gunships, precision weapon systems, GLONASS guided glide bombs. The Russians are using air power, much more air power than what the Ukrainians have, and which is essentially zero. in this area of the conflict. So again, I contend that the Russians at this point, in this specific engagement area, are perfectly happy with Ukrainian forces continuing to deploy units into this salient, which then allows the Russian Air Force and the Russian long-range fires capability to continue to cause casualties and reduce the strength of these Ukrainian forces. Now, the North Koreans. What's the purpose of the North Koreans? Are the North Koreans absolutely needed in this area of the conflict? And I would contend no. The North Koreans are present in this area of the conflict for one reason, and one reason only. Well, you could call it two reasons. One is, per treaty, they are now required to come to the assistance of the Russian Federation. Remember, I was discussing these alliances that are now being formed. Well, this is one of them. Secondly, and this is the most important reason, the North Koreans are present in the Kursk pocket, or being used in conjunction with Russian forces. That's to gain experience. That's why they're there. Now, there's been some discussion about the language barrier, about the inability of the North Koreans to speak Russian and vice versa. Look, all they really need to do, if they're going to use these North Koreans, is just set up phase lines. The North Koreans are essentially instructed that anything in between those phase lines coming at you is going to be a hostile force. That's not that difficult and doesn't require a lot of communication. Look, the United States during the first Gulf War, in which the U.S. was deployed with Egyptian, Syrian forces, French forces, you set up operational sectors, and those forces, those multinational forces that were not proficient in English, they had obviously English capability. They had interpreters, as do the North Koreans. So again, not that big of a deal. Really not. Now, what happened in regards to this recent engagement in which allegedly 30 North Korean troops were either killed or wounded, we just don't know. Yeah, very possible an engagement occurred and there were casualties on both sides. But the concept that the North Korean military is required to be there, that otherwise the Ukrainians would continue to advance without the help of the North Koreans, or the North Koreans are being used in a manner that requires their presence, is really nonsensical. There are enough capable Russian units deployed around the Kursk salient that prevents Ukrainian advancement. Before the North Koreans even appeared on the battlefield, the Russians had stopped any further Ukrainian progress in Kursk. And again, they're hunkered down in a very confined area, taking casualties day in and day out. The Ukrainian military is deeply unhappy and dissatisfied with this deployment. They feel that it has cost them momentum, especially in terms of the defense of the Donbas. The Donbas is on the verge of collapse. Russian forces are about to enter Kursk. And again, as I've talked about before, would not surprise us at all if summer next year we do see this general collapse of the Ukrainian military. I mean, it really is everywhere you go and you look at what is happening. And again, I'm using a Ukrainian reported sympathetic site. Look at this. Going to go back to, just call it November, or very start of November. Fast forward. This is not a force in terms of the Russian military that requires the assistance of the North Korean military. It's there, it's present, I contend. But again, it's there for other reasons. It's not there specifically because the Russians require the North Koreans. The North Koreans are there to gain experience. The North Koreans have spent obviously quite a bit of time preparing for a war with the South Koreans. But war is changing. And war is changing very rapidly, especially when it comes to drones and long-range fires, using long-range fires in conjunction with drone warfare. The North Koreans want practical experience in modern warfare, or the way war is being conducted right now. And it's evolving. And that's why the North Koreans are there. But we are going to continue to watch the collapse of the Kurkova pocket. We are going to watch the fall of Kursk, and eventually, we'll probably directly observe the collapse of the entire Donbas sector, which is essentially happening right now. And then what comes after that, we don't know. But we will be here. We will report the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Have a good day.